Before we begin, take a moment to notice where your phone is right now, whether it is in your hand, beside you, or just within reach, and notice how natural that feels, how little thought it requires, and how rarely it is questioned. Most people believe they use their phone because they choose to, because they are curious, busy, or simply passing time. Yet very few stop to ask why silence feels uncomfortable, why waiting feels restless, or why a quiet moment so often ends with a glowing screen. This video is not about judging phone use or asking you to give anything up, but about gently exploring what happens inside the mind when attention is always pulled outward, when every pause is filled, and when being alone with one's thoughts slowly becomes unfamiliar. We will move through the psychology of why some people find it difficult to stay away from their phone, not through facts or pressure, but through quiet observation, everyday experiences, and moments that feel deeply familiar, even if they are rarely spoken about. As you listen, there is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to change, and nothing you need to decide, because this is simply an invitation to slow down, to listen, and to notice what feels true for you beneath the noise of constant movement. If you enjoy calm reflections like this and want to continue exploring the quiet side of psychology, you can subscribe and stay with the channel. And if any part of this feels familiar, you are always welcome to share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let us begin, slowly and without rushing, by looking at the first small moment where this habit quietly starts. There is a small moment that happens quietly every day, a moment so ordinary that it often passes without being noticed, when nothing is asking for attention, when the room is calm, when the body is still, and when time seems to slow just enough for the mind to become aware of itself. In that moment, instead of feeling peaceful or neutral, a gentle unease often begins to rise. Not strong enough to feel like fear, yet uncomfortable enough to create the urge to reach for something familiar, something that fills the space before the silence has time to settle. Without much thought, the hand moves toward the phone, not because there is an expectation of news or messages, but because the body has learned this movement through repetition, responding to quiet in the same way it responds to hunger or fatigue. The screen lights up, and with it comes a soft sense of relief, not joy and not excitement, but the comfort of having something to look at, something that keeps the mind occupied and gently pulled away from itself. Silence does not arrive with danger, yet for many people it feels heavy, because when the world becomes quiet, the mind naturally turns inward, and for a mind that has grown used to constant activity, inward attention can feel unfamiliar and difficult to stay with. Thoughts that were set aside during the day begin to surface slowly. Unfinished conversations, small worries, fragments of memory. And instead of allowing these thoughts to pass on their own, the phone offers an easy way to interrupt them before they have time to form. Scrolling feels smooth and effortless, with images and words passing by without asking for commitment or reflection, allowing attention to remain light and scattered rather than focused and deep. Nothing needs to be held for long. Nothing needs to be felt fully, and the moment one thing loses interest, another appears immediately, creating a sense of movement that keeps stillness at a distance. Over time, the mind learns a quiet pattern, which is that silence brings discomfort and distraction brings relief. And this lesson is reinforced not through dramatic moments, but through countless small choices made throughout the day. waiting in line, sitting alone, lying in bed, or standing still, all become moments that are quickly filled, teaching the brain that quiet spaces should not remain empty. What is often called boredom is rarely a lack of things to do, but rather a lack of noise, and the mind, no longer practiced in resting without stimulation, reacts by searching for something external to lean on. The phone becomes the simplest solution because it requires no effort and offers immediate engagement, even if that engagement leaves no lasting satisfaction. As this habit settles in, the ability to remain still without reaching for the phone slowly weakens, not because something has been lost, but because it has not been used. Just as muscles soften when they are no longer exercised, the capacity to sit quietly fades when it is repeatedly replaced by distraction. At night, this pattern becomes more noticeable when the body is tired and the world grows dim, yet the phone stays close, glowing softly in the dark. Many people continue scrolling not out of interest, but because turning the screen off would mean being alone with their thoughts. And that kind of stillness feels harder than it should. The phone does not create this discomfort, but it becomes the answer the mind turns to whenever discomfort appears, stepping in before quiet has a chance to become familiar again. Each time silence is avoided, the habit grows slightly stronger, and each time the phone fills the space, the mind becomes a little less confident in its ability to rest on its own. Silence itself remains unchanged, patient and unmoving, waiting in the small spaces between moments, offering nothing exciting and nothing urgent, only room. The difficulty is not that silence is unpleasant, but that it has been absent for so long that returning to it feels strange. This is where the pattern begins, not in pleasure or excitement, but in the gentle inability to remain with quiet moments, and in the repeated choice to fill the space rather than stay with it, until reaching for the phone feels easier than simply being present. The phone does not ask for much effort, yet it gives the mind a steady stream of small rewards that arrive quietly and disappear just as quickly, creating a rhythm that feels engaging without ever feeling complete. Each notification, image, sound, or movement on the screen brings a brief sense of anticipation, followed by a short release, and then almost immediately, the feeling fades, leaving behind the urge to continue. This cycle does not feel intense, which is why it is easy to overlook, because it does not arrive as excitement or joy, but as a gentle pull to keep going, to scroll a little further, to refresh once more, or to check again even when nothing new is expected. The mind becomes busy without becoming fulfilled, occupied without feeling satisfied, and this difference is subtle enough that many people never pause long enough to notice it. Unlike activities that require focus and effort, the phone offers stimulation without depth, allowing the brain to receive frequent signals without having to stay with any one experience for long. There is always something else waiting just beyond the next movement of the thumb, which trains attention to expect constant change rather than patience or completion. Over time, the brain adapts to this pattern, learning to prefer quick rewards over slower ones and immediate feedback over experiences that take time to develop. Simple tasks that once felt manageable begin to feel heavy. Reading feels harder, waiting feels longer, and moments without stimulation feel empty rather than restful. This is not because the mind has become weak, but because it has been trained to respond to a different pace. The phone sets a rhythm that is fast, fragmented and endlessly renewing. And when the world does not match that rhythm, discomfort appears. The most difficult part of this cycle is that it rarely feels satisfying, even while it feels necessary. People often finish scrolling with a sense of dullness rather than contentment. Yet moments later, they return to the screen again, not to feel good, but to avoid feeling nothing. The rewards offered by the phone are small and frequent, which keeps the brain alert but never settled, active but never calm. There is no natural ending point, no signal that says enough, because the next reward is always possible, always close, and always undefined. As this pattern continues, the mind becomes less responsive to experiences that unfold slowly, such as conversations, quiet work, or moments of reflection. Attention drifts more easily, not because interest has disappeared, but because the brain has learned to expect stimulation to arrive without effort. This creates a strange tension where the phone is used to escape restlessness, yet the restlessness grows stronger the more the phone is used. The mind begins to crave stimulation while losing the ability to enjoy it fully, caught between wanting more and feeling less. There is no clear moment when this change happens, because it develops gradually, shaped by countless small interactions with the screen that feel harmless on their own. It is only when the phone is put aside that the effect becomes noticeable, as the mind searches for the familiar signals that are no longer arriving. In this absence, impatience often appears, along with a sense of boredom that feels sharper than before, revealing how deeply the brain has come to depend on frequent reward. What once felt like simple quiet now feels like something is missing, even though nothing has been taken away. The phone does not promise satisfaction, and it does not deliver it either. Yet it keeps the mind engaged through the constant suggestion that something better might appear next. This suggestion is enough to keep attention moving, even when fulfillment never arrives. There is a quiet feeling that lives underneath the habit of checking the phone, a feeling that rarely shows itself clearly, but gently guides the hand back to the screen again and again. And it is the feeling that something important might be happening somewhere else while we are not looking. This feeling is not always about missing messages or news, and it is not always dramatic or urgent, but more like a soft worry that life is moving forward without us, and that if we look away for too long, we might slowly fall behind without realizing it. Many people open their phone without knowing what they are searching for, because the act of checking itself feels comforting, as if it quietly confirms that they are still connected to the world beyond the room they are sitting in. And even when nothing new appears, the mind relaxes for a moment, reassured that nothing has been missed. Over time, the phone becomes a window into other people's lives, showing moments that look meaningful, busy, or full. And even when we do not feel jealous, the mind begins to compare without asking permission, wondering whether it is doing enough, whether it is present enough, and whether it still matters in the larger flow of things. When the phone is nearby, this window stays open and the mind feels included. But when the phone is set aside, the window closes, and with that closure comes a quiet unease, as if something might be happening just out of reach. This is why so many people feel the urge to check their phone during conversations, meals, or quiet moments, not because they are bored or careless, but because being fully present in one place can create the uncomfortable feeling of being absent everywhere else at the same time. At night, when the world becomes quieter and fewer signals arrive, this feeling often grows stronger because the mind wants reassurance before rest, wanting to know that the day has ended cleanly, that nothing important has happened without being noticed. The fear itself is gentle and rarely obvious, which is why it is so powerful, because it does not demand attention loudly, but instead quietly encourages habits that feel reasonable, small, and easy to justify. Each check seems harmless, yet together they create a state of constant alertness where the mind is never fully at rest because it is always slightly prepared to respond. This fear is not always about other people, and often it is about the self, about the worry that if attention drifts away, opportunities will pass, moments will be missed, and relevance will slowly fade. The phone promises awareness, and awareness feels like safety, even when that awareness brings no calm. Over time, the phone becomes a quiet companion, always close, always ready to confirm that we are still connected, still included, and still part of what is happening. And being without it can feel like standing outside in the dark, even when nothing specific is missing. This does not happen because people are weak, but because the human mind is deeply social, and the phone has become the easiest way to feel close without effort or risk. In the end, the fear is not truly about missing events or updates, but about missing belonging. And the phone offers a constant reminder that we are not alone, which is why putting it down can feel harder in the quiet moments when nothing else is speaking. There is a change that happens quietly when attention is pulled away again and again throughout the day. A change so gentle that most people never notice it happening, because nothing suddenly feels broken and nothing clearly goes wrong. Yet over time, something inside begins to feel thinner, less grounded, and harder to hold on to. When the phone is checked many times a day, even for only a few seconds at a time, attention never stays in one place long enough to settle. And because attention is what allows thoughts to connect, feelings to deepen, and experiences to feel whole, the mind slowly loses the sense of continuity that once held everything together. Thoughts begin but are interrupted before they can finish. Feelings appear but drift away before they can be understood. And moments pass without leaving much behind. Not because life has become empty, but because attention has learned to move on too quickly. This does not feel dramatic in daily life, because everything still works on the surface. Conversations happen, tasks are completed, and days continue to move forward. Yet beneath that movement, there is often a quiet sense of being scattered, as if the mind is always slightly elsewhere and never fully arriving where the body is. In the past, there were natural pauses built into life, moments of waiting, walking, sitting, or resting, where the mind could wander slowly, where thoughts could stretch out, and where emotions could rise and settle without being rushed. And these pauses help the mind organize itself without effort, allowing meaning to form quietly in the background. Now, many of those pauses disappear almost instantly because the phone steps in to fill even the smallest gap, turning waiting into scrolling, turning stillness into stimulation, and turning quiet moments into another place for attention to go, instead of a space for attention to rest. When this happens often enough, the mind begins to lose the feeling of being one continuous presence moving through the day, and instead becomes a series of small reactions, responding to whatever appears next on the screen. never staying long enough to feel deeply connected to any single moment. Over time, this creates a strange and subtle emptiness that is difficult to explain, because nothing obvious is missing. Yet nothing feels fully complete, and even when life is busy, there is a sense that something inside has gone quiet. The inner voice that once guided feelings and decisions does not disappear, but it becomes harder to hear beneath the constant flow of information, notifications, images, and updates. And without realizing it, many people begin to rely more on external signals to tell them what matters and how to feel. This does not mean people forget who they are, but it means they spend less time with themselves. And without time, self-understanding slowly fades, not dramatically, but gently, like a sound growing distant. Many people only notice this change when they try to sit quietly without their phone, because at first there is restlessness, then boredom, and then an unfamiliar feeling of not knowing what to do with their own thoughts, as if the mind has grown used to being guided from the outside. This moment can feel uncomfortable, not because something is wrong, but because the habit of constant input has replaced the habit of self-connection. And without that habit, attention does not know where to rest. The phone has quietly taken on the role of directing attention, deciding what appears next, what deserves reaction, and what can be ignored. And when that guidance is removed, the mind feels uncertain, like standing in a familiar place without signs pointing the way. Over time, this pattern can change how life feels as a whole, because when attention is fragmented, memories become lighter, moments blur together more easily, and days pass without clear emotional weight. Memory depends on attention, and when attention never fully settles, experiences do not fully register, leaving behind only a general sense that time has passed without much being felt. Conversations may feel shorter, not because they lack meaning, but because attention drifts before meaning has time to land, and listening becomes harder, not because of disinterest, but because the mind has learned to expect interruption. Emotions also change under this pattern, because joy, sadness, frustration, and calm pass through quickly without being fully processed, and the phone becomes a way to move past feelings instead of through them. When feelings are not allowed to settle, they do not disappear, but instead remain unfinished in the background, creating a low-level tension that is difficult to trace back to any clear cause. Over time, people may begin to feel less certain about what they want, what they enjoy, or what feels meaningful, not because those things are gone, but because the inner signal that once guided them has grown quieter. The sense of self does not break or vanish, but it becomes harder to feel, waiting beneath habits and noise for moments of uninterrupted attention that rarely arrive. The phone does not destroy identity, but it can slowly replace reflection with reaction. And when every pause is filled, there is no space left to notice how the day actually felt or what quietly mattered. As days pass in this way, life continues smoothly on the surface, while something deeper remains slightly untouched, slightly unheard, and slightly distant, not lost, but postponed. And so, attention continues to move outward. Moments continue to pass quickly, and the self waits patiently beneath it all, unchanged, quiet, and ready. Whenever the noise finally slows enough for it to be felt again. For many people, the phone slowly becomes more than a device for information or connection, because over time, it begins to act like a small and constant source of comfort that is always nearby, ready to soften any uneasy feeling before it has the chance to fully appear. Whenever boredom shows up, whenever loneliness drifts in, whenever anxiety hums quietly in the background, the phone offers a quick and familiar response, not by solving those feelings, but by gently covering them, the way background noise can make a quiet room feel less empty. This happens so naturally that most people never notice it becoming a pattern because the action feels reasonable and harmless. And because the relief arrives immediately, even if it does not last very long. Instead of sitting with discomfort and letting it rise and fall on its own, the phone steps in early, filling the space before the feeling has time to take shape. And over time, the mind learns that it does not need to stay with emotional unease for very long. This is not because people are weak or avoiding life, but because the phone is always available, always easy, and always gentle in the way it distracts, offering just enough stimulation to pull attention away without asking anything in return. Little by little, the ability to soothe oneself from the inside begins to fade, not suddenly and not dramatically, but quietly, as the habit of reaching outward replaces the habit of staying inward. When discomfort appears, instead of asking what it is or where it comes from, the hand moves toward the screen, and the feeling is softened before it can be understood. Over time, this changes the relationship people have with their own emotions, because emotions need attention to be processed. And when attention is redirected too quickly, feelings remain unfinished, lingering softly beneath the surface. The phone becomes a place where the mind can go whenever things feel unclear, overwhelming, or empty, even if that visit brings no real resolution. This pattern becomes especially clear in moments of loneliness, when being alone feels heavier than it used to. Not because loneliness has increased, but because the mind has become less practiced at staying with it. The phone offers a sense of presence, even when no one is actively interacting, simply because something is moving, something is there, and something is responding. Over time, being alone without the phone can begin to feel unfamiliar, as if silence and stillness no longer know how to hold attention on their own. This does not mean that the phone removes loneliness or anxiety, but it delays them, pushing them aside temporarily, which makes them feel stronger when they eventually return. Because the phone so often steps in before emotions can be felt fully, the mind slowly forgets that emotions are meant to pass, and instead begins to believe that they must be avoided. This creates a quiet dependence, not on the phone itself, but on the relief it provides from inner discomfort, making it harder to trust that the mind can regulate itself without help. Over time, small emotions that once felt manageable begin to feel heavier because the skill of sitting with them has not been exercised. The phone becomes a kind of emotional shortcut, offering escape instead of understanding, movement instead of stillness, and distraction instead of presence. This does not make people less emotional, but it makes emotions less familiar, because they are rarely allowed to stay long enough to be recognized. When the phone is finally put down, all of those delayed feelings can appear at once, creating a sense of restlessness or unease that feels confusing and overwhelming. This is why silence can feel so uncomfortable after long periods of constant phone use, because silence allows emotions to surface without interruption. The phone does not cause these emotions, but it prevents practice in facing them gently. Over time, comfort becomes something that comes from outside rather than inside. And without realizing it, many people lose trust in their ability to self-soothe. This shift is subtle and easy to miss, because life continues normally on the surface. Yet underneath, emotional resilience slowly weakens. The phone remains close, always ready to step in, not as a solution, but as a pause, a delay, and a soft covering for feelings that are waiting to be felt. And so, the habit continues quietly, with the phone acting as a steady emotional buffer, keeping discomfort at a distance, while slowly teaching the mind that it no longer needs to learn how to hold itself. There is a moment that often surprises people when they finally put their phone down for a while, because instead of feeling calm or free, the first feeling that appears is usually discomfort, a quiet restlessness that has no clear reason and no clear direction. Nothing bad is happening in that moment. The body is safe, the room is quiet, and there is time to rest. Yet the mind feels unsettled, as if it is waiting for something that is not arriving. And this feeling can be confusing for people who believe that putting the phone away should feel immediately peaceful. This discomfort does not mean that the phone was bringing happiness, but it does mean that the phone was filling a role that often goes unnoticed, which is giving the mind constant direction about where to go next. When the phone is present, attention is guided effortlessly because there is always something to look at, something to react to, and something to move toward. And the mind does not need to decide how to spend the moment. When the phone is removed, that guidance disappears and attention is suddenly left on its own, without instructions, without structure, and without a familiar rhythm to follow. For a mind that has grown used to being guided from the outside, this can feel uncomfortable, not because something is missing, but because something internal has not been practiced for a long time. Attention does not know where to rest, so it moves around restlessly, jumping from thought to thought, noticing small bodily sensations, unfinished worries, and passing emotions that were usually softened or delayed by distraction. This is often mistaken for boredom or anxiety, but it is closer to withdrawal from constant stimulation, even though that word sounds stronger than the experience itself. The discomfort is gentle but persistent, like a low hum in the background, and because people are not used to sitting with it, the natural response is to reach for the phone again to make it stop. What many people do not realize is that this feeling is not new, and it did not suddenly appear when the phone was put down, but it has been present underneath the surface for a long time, quietly postponed each time attention was redirected outward. When the phone is gone, there is nothing left to cover it, so it becomes noticeable. The mind begins to replay small thoughts that were never finished, worries that were never fully felt, and questions that were never given time to settle. And because these experiences arrive together, they can feel overwhelming, even though none of them are particularly intense on their own. This is why the first moments without the phone often feel harder than expected, because they are not just moments of quiet, but moments where many delayed experiences arrive at once. The phone had been acting like a buffer, spacing these experiences out and keeping them at a distance. And without that buffer, the mind feels exposed. This exposure can feel unfamiliar, especially for people who have spent years filling every pause, every wait, and every quiet moment with stimulation. Being alone with the mind begins to feel like a skill that has been forgotten, even though it was once natural. People often say that their thoughts race when they put the phone down, but it is not that thoughts suddenly speed up. It is that they are no longer being interrupted before they can be noticed. The mind has always been active, but the phone made that activity easier to ignore. Without the screen, attention turns inward, and for many people, inward attention feels unsteady because it has not been practiced gently over time. This is also why time can feel slower without the phone, because when attention is no longer jumping rapidly between stimuli, each moment stretches out and becomes more noticeable. What once passed quickly now feels longer, and without constant novelty, the mind begins to feel impatient, not because time is actually slow, but because the brain has learned to expect frequent stimulation. This impatience is not a flaw, but a sign of adjustment, a signal that the nervous system is recalibrating to a different pace. The discomfort of being without the phone is often temporary, but many people never stay with it long enough to notice that, because they return to the phone at the first sign of unease. By doing so, the mind never learns that the discomfort can soften on its own. Over time, this creates a belief that the phone is necessary for comfort, when in reality the phone has simply been preventing the mind from relearning how to settle. The discomfort is not asking to be eliminated, but to be experienced gently, without judgment and without urgency. When people finally stay with it for a little longer, they often notice that it changes shape, first feeling restless, then dull, then slowly calming as attention begins to rest instead of search. This process feels unfamiliar because it is slow, and slowness is something the phone has trained the mind to avoid. Stillness does not offer immediate reward, and it does not entertain. But it allows the nervous system to settle in a way that stimulation never does. The phone creates movement, while stillness creates grounding, and moving away from constant movement can feel uncomfortable at first. Many people mistake this initial discomfort as proof that they need the phone, when it is actually a sign that the mind is adjusting to being present again. The phone did not remove the ability to be calm, but it delayed it, and delayed abilities often feel difficult when they are used again. This is why silence can feel heavy at first, because it asks for nothing but attention, and attention feels unfamiliar when it has been directed outward for too long. The mind expects something to happen, and when nothing does, it feels unsettled, even though nothing is wrong. Over time, if the phone remains away long enough, this discomfort often gives way to a quieter state, where thoughts slow slightly, the body relaxes, and attention begins to rest naturally. This does not happen suddenly, and it does not happen every time, but it becomes more possible with practice. The discomfort of being without the phone is not a sign of failure, but a doorway, one that many people step away from before realizing where it leads. It is the feeling of attention, learning how to stand on its own again, without constant instruction, without constant interruption, and without constant noise. And until that learning is allowed to happen, the phone will continue to feel necessary, not because it brings peace, but because it protects the mind from the unfamiliar experience of quiet presence. There is a moment that arrives quietly after the phone has been set aside for longer than usual. Not dramatic and not immediate, but gradual, almost easy to miss, when attention begins to feel less restless and more settled, as if it is no longer searching for something to grab onto. At first, the mind still wanders, thoughts still drift in and out, and the habit of reaching outward remains close. Yet beneath that movement, there is a subtle change, a sense that time is no longer rushing forward quite as fast as it used to. Moments begin to stretch slightly, not because the world has slowed down, but because attention is no longer being pulled away every few seconds, allowing experience to unfold at its natural pace instead of being constantly interrupted. Sounds become more noticeable, the feeling of the body becomes clearer, and small details that were once ignored begin to stand out again, like the weight of a chair, the rhythm of breathing, or the soft change of light in a room. This does not feel exciting, and that is what makes it different from stimulation, because excitement pulls attention forward, while this feeling allows attention to rest where it already is. Thoughts begin to connect more easily, not racing or competing, but forming gentle lines that make sense, allowing the mind to follow one idea long enough for it to settle, instead of being replaced immediately by another. Emotions also change in this space, because without constant distraction, feelings are given time to arrive fully, stay briefly, and then move on instead of being pushed aside before they can be understood. This can feel unfamiliar at first, because many people are used to managing emotions by avoiding them. Yet, when avoidance fades, emotions often become simpler rather than stronger, clearer rather than overwhelming. Sadness feels quieter, joy feels softer, and calm begins to appear, not as a sudden relief, but as a steady background that does not demand attention. The mind starts to notice that it does not need constant input to stay awake, and that being present does not require effort when interruption is reduced. This is when attention begins to return to life itself rather than to the screen, allowing ordinary moments to feel complete again. Eating becomes something that is actually tasted. Walking becomes something that is actually felt. And being alone becomes something that does not need to be filled immediately. The world feels less fragmented, not because it has changed, but because attention is no longer split into pieces. Memories begin to form more clearly, because attention is what allows experiences to leave a trace. And when attention stays long enough, moments become something that can be remembered, rather than something that simply passes. Days stop blending together quite as much. And even when routines remain the same, there is a subtle sense of continuity that makes time feel more grounded. This return of attention does not mean the phone disappears from life, but it no longer feels like the center around which everything else revolves. The phone becomes a tool again rather than a companion, something that can be used and then set aside without creating immediate discomfort. This shift does not happen through force or strict control, but through familiarity with quiet moments, where the mind learns that nothing bad happens when stimulation is absent. Over time, trust slowly returns. Not trust in the phone, but trust in the mind's ability to exist without constant guidance. The need to check softens, not because of discipline, but because the urgency fades on its own when attention feels settled. Stillness no longer feels empty, and silence no longer feels heavy, because they are no longer unfamiliar. In this space, the self becomes easier to feel, not as an idea or a label, but as a steady presence beneath thoughts and emotions. There is no sudden clarity, no final understanding, just a gentle sense of being here without needing to go anywhere else. Life feels less like a stream of reactions and more like a continuous experience, where moments connect naturally instead of breaking apart. The mind no longer feels pulled in many directions at once, and because of that, energy that was once scattered begins to gather again. This does not make life perfect or problems disappear, but it makes problems feel more manageable, because attention is no longer exhausted before it can respond. Challenges are faced one at a time instead of all at once, and emotions are felt as they come, rather than being delayed and stacked beneath distraction. The return of attention is quiet and humble, not something that needs to be announced or achieved, but something that happens naturally when space is allowed. It feels less like gaining something new and more like remembering something old, something that was always there but had been covered by noise. Over time, the phone loses its power to interrupt every pause, and pauses regain their original purpose, which is not to be filled, but to be lived. Silence becomes a place where the mind can rest rather than escape, and stillness becomes something that supports rather than threatens. Attention settles not because it is controlled, but because it is no longer constantly pulled away. And in that settling, life begins to feel whole again, not louder, not faster, but steady, connected and quietly present, the way it always was before the noise took over.